Hello, and welcome back to the Balanced and Blissful Energies podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Echevarria, and today I'm very happy to welcome Veronique Ory. She's an intuitive movement and mindful awareness guide, international retreat leader, and author of Shine On and Off the Mat. She has over 500 hours of yoga training and years of leading retreats around the world. Veronique blends yoga, storytelling, and self-inquiry into experiences that help people reconnect to themselves and shine in every aspect of life. Her teachings are known for their poetic language, grounded presence, and practical tools that make mindfulness and movement accessible both on and off the mat. Welcome, Veronique.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Very happy to be here.
Great. Well, I'd love to open with getting to know you a little bit. I was very intrigued to have, of course, there are a lot of yoga teachers out there, but you have an interesting history about having had a theater company in New York, been very working in the hustle and bustle, as you said, and then shifted. And I personally have gone through my own career transition midlife. And so I like to highlight women that have gone through this successfully. So please share with us your experience.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's so important to highlight because the old model is you might go to school for the thing or you have a certain idea of what you might do for the rest of your life when you're 5 or 10 or 18 years old and our ancestors didn't live as long as we do. So maybe that was like, okay, we'll do that until we're 30 and then that'll probably be the end of our life. And then more and more as certainly our lifespan has expanded, but also just gender dynamics have shifted and the possibility of what jobs are available and even continues to evolve and shift over time. And so it's just really important, I think, that we're in that conversation within ourselves and in our community and with our families of what is actually serving in the here and the now versus like, oh, like I went to school for this. And sometimes there's a guilt script that plays of I should just give it a little bit more time or, I've already invested so much time and money into this thing. Like surely if I just give it, 5 more years or, whatever length of time we think, okay, if it doesn't happen by this year, then I'm pivoting. And, we don't want to give plan B or we don't want to give an expiration date because then we think, okay, then that has to happen. And I didn't have a plan B. I knew that I was going to be in some kind of form of entertainment since I was 5 years old. I just loved bringing people together for the thought provoking experiences, even though, my 5 year old brain was like, I just love singing and dancing for my grandparents. And they just were so excited to be in that circle, which is, hearkening to the dawn of time of how we gathered in circles. And so it makes sense that it shifted into this new realm of let us gather in a way that helpful, that feels provoking of conversation, that feels like, okay, what's going on in the mind? What's going on in the body? How are we connecting to spirit? All of these different things. And so letting that have space to shift and evolve. If someone had told me when I was studying theater that these skills of improvisation, of storytelling, of really having a command of the English language would shift into guiding private clients and leading retreats all over the world. I don't know that I would even have an awareness of what that would be and how I would even fit into that because this was certainly not in my realm of awareness at all until really my 30s. I mean, a little bit in terms of meditation. That was actually my first entry point when I was 20 years old, assisting this father who I was nannying kids and the father of the kids. He's a psychotherapist, family and marriage counselor, leads silent retreats. So I assisted him and I had an awareness and a really strong connection to meditation. And so I love to highlight that too, because I think sometimes people have, particularly depending on what your access point is into yoga, a lot of people that I might run into, their apprehension is, oh, I can't do that because I'm not flexible, or oh, I can't do that because I can't still my mind, or, I prefer Pilates, or I just like my tennis, or, whatever the thing is. And really, what I love to highlight is you could think of yoga as just a mindfulness practice in whatever it is that you're doing. If you are mindfully listening to this conversation, you could say, this is a yoga practice, right? You and I sitting, and we're not simultaneously, making a quilt or tending to the garden, even though, there could be a habit stacking that you could mindfully coupled together. I definitely love listening to a podcast while I'm on a nature walk or, on a drive. But it does highlight, all the times that we divert our attention in kind of sneaky ways or subconscious ways, where if we really just listen in and we get still, then we can just glean so much from that experience.
And I mean, what you're talking about is going to the heart of the meaning of yoga, right? It's about bringing, what is it? The yoke, putting the yoke on the crazy mind,
Yeah.
and the body too, right? Like
Hmm.
think in the Western world that yoga is just like exercise, but it isn't just exercise. And I remember going back to my very first yoga class. I was in college, and so I think it was like my very first year of college, and I was floored. I had no idea that I could feel that calm and that centered after any kind of activity, actually. It was, I had done dance in my youth, and so, the idea of like the flexibility and stuff, that wasn't an interference for me, but it took me someplace where I hadn't been before. And that continued to be an outlet for me for like it still is now. Yeah. How did you first encounter yoga, and how did that help you make the steps that you needed to, or take the steps that you needed to take?
I first was playing with it in the meditation practice. So, silent meals, silent meditations, seated, as well as walking meditations. That was really what I was tending to in my 20s for the most part. I have a memory of going to one class somewhere in my mid 20s when I was living in Los Angeles. And it's that common story. Like, a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should really try this." And so I went with my friend, and I wasn't a dancer, I wasn't a gymnast. I have awareness of my body and space just from theater training and doing different exercises where you're embodying different characters, and you're doing different kind of exercises, sometimes, in improv where you're exaggerating physicalities and things like that. So in my mind, I thought, okay, I'll just do the best that I can, which, that's all we can ever do. And anyway, fast forward to the end of this class, and the teacher came up to me and said, "Oh, actually, the beginner class is at a different time." And I just felt so embarrassed, because I thought I had done okay, whatever that meant. Like, I followed along as best as I could. But it's funny, like, as the years have gone on, I realize, I was a beginner. And that can kind of really inhibit us as adults. Like, we stop ourselves from trying things that are new because we don't want to look like we don't know what we're doing. But we oftentimes don't know what we're doing. And so the way that we regard that, whether we can lean in with curiosity of, okay, these are all new shapes. Or, you might pick up an instrument and it's brand new, or you might decide to learn a new language. It's brand new. You can't expect a fluency just to show up like that. And and so it really wasn't until 10 years after that point when I was living in New York where and I love to highlight this piece too because I think there's a really fantastic part of finding whatever the practice is or whatever the attunement is. So it's our receptivity in that moment combined with the connection to the teacher, the connection to the practice itself. All of that has to converge, which is a little bit of a miracle in a lot of ways, right? That the setting feels like a place that your nervous system feels safe to relax, right? So all of that converged on this class, which was also on the heels of Hurricane Sandy coming through New York, and everything had shut down for 2 days, which was a really big deal. Like the subways and Broadway don't close very often. And I had been definitely running a million miles an hour for quite some time. And so for everything to come to a screeching halt, and then all of a sudden, my roommate at the time suggested we go to a yoga class because he had heard that the studio had just opened back up and did I want to go? And it was one of those things like he could have said, do you want to go get a bite to eat or do you want to go for a walk? Whatever it was. Yes, let's go. And so I went, and it was this really beautiful teacher. She had such a welcoming voice, such a calm presence, and she guided us through a very gentle vinyasa style flow. And then it was 30 minutes of restorative at the end where we're just laying down and held in nice stretches. And she came around and made sure everyone was comfortable. And yeah, it felt like kind of like an aunt kind of energy, like a family member that you want to hang out with. And and so I went to the front desk afterwards and I said, "Okay, I'm signing up for an unlimited pass. I'm going to be here the rest of my days." And it really changed the trajectory of my life. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from there, it was like, okay, now that I know, excuse me, how to slow down, how to connect to my breath, connect to my body. I had previously been thinking, that when someone could do something that I couldn't do, I would get really hard on myself. And I would almost like feel like the inner 2-year old would be like, I can't do that. Like I want to like tantrum about it. And I would find myself feeling that way in these classes where, in New York City and really, all over the world, there's just such magnificent people that can do really impressive things with their bodies. And and so I was regarding this one woman, she was in a handstand and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do that. That just looks so impossible." Even though, as a kid, like I probably attempted, but I never was someone that went for sports in a competitive way. Like I really loved movement just recreationally. So I would kind of play at horseback riding or I'd play at swimming or, even as a young kid, I played at gymnastics, but it was more like tumbling. It wasn't like I was doing anything that I was trying out for the Olympics or something. And so as I was having this thought of I'll never be able to do that, it was like there was this voice that showed up and said, "How do you know?" And and this has been really instrumental in how I regard the physical practice as well as everything off of the mat. So it's like how we regard our relationships or how we might have a certain vision of maybe like a dream for our life. And so I started to invite this idea of shifting away from being intimidated to being inspired. Like, oh, wow, okay, so if she can do this, it means that it's possible, right? It's not like I have this like wild vision of something that I've never seen before and I have to, have this heroic thing that I'm inventing, which also is possible, right? People do that all the time. But there's something really encouraging. And I love to highlight this too, because it really helps to alchemize when we can kind of squash our potential because we see someone else doing it and we perceive that they're doing it better and they always will. When we continue to show up and we have persistence and perseverance and we have that sense of curiosity when we're practicing of, well, maybe, and then that starts to shift. Like the opening of the possibility starts to shift. And so that's what started to happen was I started to find shapes in the body that I'd previously thought I'd never be able to find. And then I started to try on in my mind, like these things that I was telling myself I'd never be able to achieve, whether it was, something about a romantic relationship or something in regards to relationship with friends or with work or any kind of blocks that I had that I was actually really conscious of or anything that was kind of subconscious. Like I definitely held this belief for so many years, really like the entirety of my 17-year theater company, of this pride around being a starving artist. Like it has to be hard. And like and what that does, and I know a lot of people hold it, it's like you feel like it's bragging rights. Like I'm like really like working hard at this. As if there's something to be ashamed of. I'm hired to do this project and I'm getting paid very well. Like people don't feel like they can say that because there's these people over here that aren't. And so you feel like, oh, I don't want to upset all these people who are like really struggling. But really, like when we can start to actually elevate the collective, right? Just because one person is thriving doesn't mean that the rest of the world can't. In fact, when we start to let go of that shame or guilt around it, then we actually elevate the collective. And so that was something that, like, it plagued me for so many years. And I had like a really defining moment around that towards the end of my theater company's run where I just said, I'm really ready to thrive. Like I'm just really exhausted in this feeling like I'm just surviving, you know? And it was such like a cinematic scene where I'm, having this conversation with my friend and who was the associate producer to our off-Broadway show that we had produced. And, it's like a mound of trash is here and like ambulances are going by, like people are probably like panhandling, and one of our designers had just left because of a family emergency, and I'm just like sobbing. And 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 that was like such like a part of the regular rhythm of being an artist, was like really high highs and really low lows, and just feeling like the world was over and then like so elated, like on cloud nine, and
Drama.
so much drama. And then I just, I had this moment. I looked at my friend Chris. I was like I'm just wanting to thrive. And like I knew that like he knew it too, of the same ilk. Like we're both such passionate and, continue to be passionate artists, but in different regards now. It's like I think there's definitely like a molting that needs to happen of that old archetype, because I feel that as a weight in the collective, that energy of people feeling like I can't or I shouldn't, or, that kind of constricting, like, feeling like you are a starving artist,
Mm.
and I have conversations with friends about that a lot. And It's
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 so
so layered,
layered,
and you
and
could
you could
definitely go
definitely
down
go
the
down the
rabbit
rabbit
hole of,
hole of,
like,
like,
what your
what your
money
money
story
story
was when you
was
were
when you were
growing
growing
up, and,
up,
like,
and, like,
how that
how that
played
played
through, like,
through, like,
intergenerationally,
intergenerationally,
all of
all
that
of that
stuff,
stuff.
and
And
part
part
of,
of,
the
the
example of,
example of,
seeing this
seeing
woman
this
doing
woman
a
doing a
handstand,
handstand,
it's
it's
like,
like,
we just want to feel empowered that we could do whatever it is that we want, right? That we can, like, set our attention to something, and then, like, we thrive to balance on our hands, like, even if just in our mind's eye, like, that's really impactful. And and so I offer that to my clients a lot. I'll offer something just out of reach. I'll say, do this or think about it. And it's almost like like a joke. Like, okay, I'll just think about it. But if you actually think about it, right? I mean, they do brain scans of, the group of people who played the piano piece actually, and then the group of people that just thought about practicing the piano piece. And it's very similar. And so over time, you can start to cultivate a skill or a mindset or whatever it is that you're aligning with, and that can really make huge ripples within your life, and then also that shifts and extends out to the lives that each of us touches.
yeah. Yeah, wow, I love this story, like, these reflections of how what you were experiencing on the yoga mat, right? Comparing yourself to others and making that connection with how yeah, how on the one hand, "Oh my god, I'm never gonna be able to do that," like, the initial thought, right? And then on the other hand, like, the ability to say, "Well, if she can do it, why wouldn't I be able to do it actually?" Right? Like, she's human. She we're in the same room, we're in the same town, like, should be possible, maybe, if I apply myself. But at the same time, it's like part of the hesitation that so many people have to try something new is when they see somebody who's, like, so good at what they're doing, and it's intimidating, right? It's like, "Oh, no, I can't do that." Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, no, that's not for me, I can't do that." And I'm always encouraged to see people, like newcomers, men, coming into the yoga center to just try it out, just do what's possible. Because as you said, when you find these new and different shapes in your body, it's translating in a very interesting and difficult to put words to way into real life, into the way that you think, into the way that you see things outside, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love to go into that, like that embodiment principle of why we do these exercises in yoga and not just meditate. Meditation is absolutely a huge part of it, but the physical practice is also an important component, I find, to be able to open up the energy,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
and our way of thinking about things without even having to analyze it so much. It just sort of pops.
What comes to mind is in this hyper comfortable modern world that we've arrived to, is how powerful the yoga practice is in many different regards, and maybe so impactful in present day for many parts of the world if you have the privilege to live in a place that you have air conditioning or even a fan, or that you have the ability to eat when you're hungry, or all of these things that we might take for granted. I think having chosen moments for stress, so for example, you're holding a challenging shape and you're trying to maintain a meditative breath throughout, we're entraining the mind, the body, the spirit to regulate under pressure. So we're actually not seeking for a comfortable life that doesn't have conflict, where we never have a disturbing thought and we like never experience grief or suffering or any of these things. The whole spectrum of emotions are welcome, but rather how we are dancing with these emotions can directly impact the way that we are arriving to each moment. And so this is why they often might show the example of, two people are sitting next to each other on a plane. They're heading to Los Angeles. One person is in a panic, like, oh my gosh, like the smog and traffic and like, and then the other person's like, I can't wait to see the beach and like the handprints and the footprints. It's going to be so amazing, right? These two people are heading to the same place and they're having very different experiences. And so that's just an example of how we might do that. Say, you and I are holding a chair pose for 5 breaths, and one of us is like, when is this going to be done? I'm pretty sure this has been more than 5 breaths. Like, I've counted 10 breaths, like, can I just be done? Versus the other person's like, wow, I'm cultivating so much strength. I wonder if I could breathe longer here. Like, maybe I'll just sit a little bit deeper. Maybe I'll just challenge myself a little bit more. Right. And, I think bridging where the sort of extreme responses are, and even if we are having the chosen stress response, that we're actually aware and awake to that. Like, I love to be triggered, to be like, wow, I'm seeing red right now, and I can like state it out loud. Like, wow, like if I could just get this out of my body in a way that feels very therapeutic. So I'll often share, because people will ask, like, how do you navigate when you are triggered, and you want to lash out, or you want to say the thing that you might perhaps regret. It's like, we want to create scenarios where we can practice that. And I really do think that the practice on the mat is really telling. So oftentimes each shape is described as portals into the self, right? Whether you think you're doing something really well, or you think like, oh, like, I can't believe she's having us do camel pose. Like, I hate camel pose. Like, whatever, like the thought that shows up in in our minds, it's like, okay, so I'm witnessing that, and if I can just change from judgment to curiosity, like, what is actually wanting to be revealed here? And how can I be befriending the discomfort so that I can be in like comfortable discomfort, where I'm able to breathe and I cultivate slower breaths? Because what happens then is we actually start to find more resiliency in the physical practice, and then simultaneously we're finding resiliency and command of what the thoughts are doing and the story that we're creating, that may or may not be connected to the truth. Very often, we confuse our opinion for fact. And so it's so wildly helpful to seek the cosmic giggle in it all. Not to say that, there aren't moments to take things seriously, but you know, to have a malleability of when we lean serious or when we can find a little bit of a sense of humor around something. And so I do think that, for example, the transitions from shape to shape, that's something that I really love to invite for my own practice as well as with my clients, of languid, slow transitions. Because oftentimes in the practice off the mat, we're like, next, 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 right? Like, we end the meeting, we're like into the next thing. We like are meeting with a friend for lunch, even. They like go to the washroom, like, let me just check my messages real quick. Like, whatever the thing is, we're like seeking for the next sort of like dopamine hit. And so what I love to help practice is actually lingering in the in between, because most of the time we are in the in between. Right? So we might think like, oh gosh, like, when is the next job going to arrive? Or like, when's my next soulmate going to show up? Or like, when's my next soul dog going to come into my life? Or, whatever the thing is that we're like seeking to like get beyond the pain of the discomfort of the unknown of what's going to come next. It's like, ooh, if we can luxuriate in this, then we actually can be dancing with the universe and the magic can swirl in a way that we can't possibly know in our minds, right? And so oftentimes the perfect example of this is through a vinyasa, right? The sequence of shapes where you just the part where from plank to chaturanga to some kind of back bend into down dog, there is like a race to down dog for most people, right? Like, and so what I love to invite is like, we're going to have a really slow inhale in this plank, and then just as long of an exhale into your chaturanga dandasana. This, yeah, we're holding our way halfway between plank and laying on the belly. And we're just in relationship with gravity that never takes a vacation, apparently. Like we're just going to be here. And then not until the exhale is fully expressed, then the inhale comes, and then you can luxuriate into your up dog or cobra, maybe your sphinx, maybe some kind of locust variation, get long. And then how slowly can you emerge your way back into your downward facing dog, which is a completely different quality of experience where you're not like robbing yourself of all of that strength and length and mobility and play and functional range of motion and also command of the length of your breath. Because guess what? If you can be in command of a very slow exhale in chaturanga, when your significant other says something to you that you like know, like they know how to like poke this like certain thing, like you're probably more adept at breathing very slowly in that moment also, right? And then it's like, I'm just going to take a pause before I respond. It's the same thing versus like rushing to the response or rushing to the down dog. It's the same thing. Yeah.
It probably also helps to minimize the risk of injury if you're moving so slowly, right?
Certainly. Hmm.
I've had my injuries with yoga and also humbling experiences where one time I was in crow pose, I think it was, and I went boop, just hit
Anyway,
my head.
yeah.
I actually cut myself too. It was
Shoot.
pretty embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, it's a close to the ground shape.
It is a close to the ground shape. But it's like it's this in looking back to when that happened,
Hmm.
there was a lot of pushing, right, on my side, like wanting to achieve, wanting to do this, like,
Certainly.
and that's also part of the going really fast through all of the movements. It's like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be an aerobic exercise, actually.
I know. I know. I feel like I can't say it enough. Like, this is meditation in movement. If you lose your breath, if you're contorting your face, stop, move more slowly, take a beat because it's not meant to be calisthenics, even though there are physical benefits to the practice. There's physical benefits to getting the heart rate up. But so this is like a really common thing that I see people sneaking 8 chaturangas with every vinyasa to get like extra reps. And I just want to like tap the guy on the shoulder and be like, if you just did one, like really slowly, it would be so much more beneficial, not only for your joints, but also for your mind. I do think that there is benefit to, that stress load, to getting your heart rate up. But if you're rushing reps when your shoulder is at that angle, it is a vulnerable place to be in, not to dose any fear, because I feel like we are resilient and strong, and oftentimes we don't hurt ourselves. But I think it's just slowing down, as you're saying, in order to have a mindfulness around when we're fatigued and when we would benefit from finding chosen rest, which is different than like tapping out when we're at that muscle failure point, but like we could breathe another one, but we're tapping out too soon because the mind is trying to convince the body that it's done, but actually we have more reserve than we give ourselves credit for. But it's definitely challenging in real time to know, am I being challenged and it's like good, strong sensation, or am I getting like a shooting pain that's signaling like, okay, I should probably take a knee, and take
Or slow down.
or
Yeah.
slow down.
Not
Exactly.
stretch so hard or yeah.
I know.
Yeah. But that's part of yoga, literally,
Hmm.
like, right? It's knowing your limits and being aware of your body, being in your body and not just in your mind.
Yeah.
And sometimes recognizing that when the teacher is saying to do this, this, is that, and your body's not ready for it, just listen to your body.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's part of the challenge in group classes is you have perhaps, a group of people where maybe these people over here have been practicing for years and years. You have a couple people, it's their very first class. Maybe this person's, recovering from a knee surgery or like a rotator cuff situation, and they're all in the same room being guided through the same experience. And so, this would definitely be, a certain kind of access into the practice. And, if you're unsure, right, because it does cultivate certain amount of time and experience to have that discernment, definitely connecting to someone where you can be one on one and have a more curated experience just so that you can start to refine that for yourself. Like I have private clients that will move really thoughtfully through something and then they'll reflect like, oh, I went to this group class and they were moving so fast. It was like inhale this, exhale that. It was like, oh my gosh, like I'm barely into my inhale and we're like on to the next shape. And so, I just shared with them, you can actually go slower than everyone. Like you have permission not to be in like a synchronized yoga experience. It's not, synchronized swimming like you're like in a choreographed room. But, I think it is really beautiful when each person is attuning to what they need. Maybe this person has a knee down, this person is keeping their arms down by their side. Everyone is finding that there's their own access into the practice. Sometimes I've had people come and lay down the entire class and just be in the community and be in the breath and their own visualization of what feels grounding to them in the moment. Like sometimes none of the movement is necessary if we can tap into that meditative state, and stillness feels like the thing.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to shift a little bit into your retreat work. How did you get into, doing retreats and what do you do now with the retreats? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love retreats personally. I have attended many retreats as a practitioner, and I grew up going on holiday where they were very much activity based. Like my family would pick a spot that would have activities for the kids and activities for the adults. And so it was almost like a choose your own adventure. Like my mom would play tennis and they had, flying trapeze. And I was always, an adventure spirit. And and then for several years, my mom and I went to Vermont and we went to this sculling retreat, the rowing in those long skinny boats. And it was rowing in the day and then yoga in the evening. And that was kind of like around the time that I had started to cultivate a strong yoga practice as a practitioner in New York City. And then it was like a really strong shift. I had the original studio that I had that life-changing experience in was in Astoria, Queens, called the Yoga Room. And then I ended up moving to Washington. And so one of the teachers that taught at the studio in Queens, she also taught at the studio on the Upper West Side called Pure Yoga West. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is like where celebrities go. It was such a fancy studio where you went downstairs and it just felt like a haven. And then I thought, oh wow, like it'll never get better than this. And one of my favorite teachers there, Kylie Holiday, I was going to her class regularly, and she happened to mention in the dead of winter on a February morning, well, I was kind of thinking about leading a retreat in St. Lucia this time next year. You know, she could barely finish the sentence, and we're all like, you know, we're there. And so that became a ritual with my mom and I, where we would go to a yoga retreat every year. And then I started to feel like as I was wanting to try on the idea of teaching, I thought, oh, wow, travel and yoga and really great company and really delicious food. Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. You know, like I love to be there for it, to be able to guide and experience is certainly a dream. And so fast forward to here I am in Florida and I'm teaching here. There's a global pandemic and I definitely need to travel. And, you know, it's so fun when something is taken off the table and you realize like, oh no, I like really want to get on a plane. And it, you know, that was so restricted for so long. And so as things were opening back up, I reached out to a friend of mine, Erin Lanahan Kolenda, who lives in my town. And she and I, we have different styles. And so I felt like we would complement one another. And so I reached out to her to see if she might be interested in collaborating. And she had been thinking about leading retreats for years and years. And so we had set out to do one retreat a year. And and so we landed on going to Costa Rica, which is one of my favorite countries in the world. And so that became an annual tradition where we ended up going to Costa Rica a few times, and then we went to Portugal last year, and then this year we're heading to Italy. So, we, yeah. So if you're interested, October 24th to the 31st, yeah, very easy for you to get to. Yeah,
Wonderful. Yeah, and one more, yeah, area to explore with you is the we talked about the body and the energy that kind of like shifts when you're doing things. And this is the Balance and Blissful Energies podcast. I really like to talk about energy. And what is your experience with energy flow in the body and health effects with yoga that you've experienced yourself as well as in your clients? Can you speak to either both from the emotional release side as well as just the general health effects, like shifts that people have had in their health?
absolutely. Yeah. So initially, when I was teaching group classes everywhere, I would on a Sunday feel into what does the theme of the upcoming week want to be. And I would sit in meditation, kind of feel into what felt most at the surface in my own personal life. And as we're so interconnected, that always resonates with everyone, right? So we each have our own individual entry point into it, but I love to bring a little bit of the story or like a little bit of the theme, you know, in those days because it felt like let's have reason as to why we're moving in the way that we're moving so that we can have mind meals as we're traveling. So, for example, if we're meditating on letting go, we might be in a forward fold and in the visualization of the weighty things just rolling off of the back, or as we kind of swan dive, we're like clearing the energy around the body so that we can be liberated of the things that feel heavy. And so different things like that. And what ended up happening was I would, run into students around town and they would say, "Oh my gosh, I keep thinking about how you put this in this particular way." And it really stays with us, throughout the week of how that practice parlays into, we're at the red light and, someone isn't moving ahead of us, or, there's these opportunities of trigger where we get to practice these things off of the mat. And so that parlayed into my book, Shine On and Off the Mat, that you had spoken of at the beginning. And then that has evolved into an online collective of members coming in to the guided practices and the stories that are holding each of the practices. So there's guided meditation and vinyasa and yin style practices under a theme, and there's a story. And the invitation is that each person can see what they're going through in their own life and how it relates. And what's powerful about, a timely and timeless theme like let go, slow down, is no matter where you are, whether you're you're practicing this today or next week or 10 years from now, there's always going to be something to regard. And that's one of the powers of the forever practice is we're never, arriving at that down dog and like we're complete. There's going to be another opportunity to play with that in between to arrive at the next place and to the next place. And so one of the things that I've really witnessed with my clients since I've shifted into primarily guiding one-on-one is less so about me conjuring a theme week by week. It's I start each session and I ask, what are you craving? And so the invitation is, as much as someone is willing to share, what's going on in their life. And oftentimes it's less, a certain shape or, a physical something. Usually it's something going on in their personal life. So usually it's, this person in my life or that person. And from that, it starts to be highlighted how that's showing up physically in the body. So sometimes the physical practice doesn't even happen. Like I've definitely had sessions where we're in conversation the whole time. And that's also a yoga practice, right? We're like moving the energy by not letting the thoughts be on the gerbil wheel. We're like letting them shift and transmute somehow. And maybe a little bit of stretching, or sometimes it might be like, okay, I just want to move this out. And then it might be somatic exercises, moving, clearing, letting some heat be generated, things like that. And so that becomes an ever growing conversation because based on what someone is craving today, next week, next year, it's always shifting. And then I co create with them an experience that helps support what that is. So So that's really powerful. And then you can see how that shifts their physical body. And probably what's most telling is, after the experience, they lay down in shavasana or corpse pose, and then they come back up to seated, and then the entire physiology of their face has shifted. And what's so potent to remark on that is the exterior world, right, hasn't shifted, but the inner world has. And so, we can all day long say and think, well, if they would just, fill in the blank, then I would, you know. But sometimes it's like, if I would just, then peace can be found not based on exterior circumstances shifting, but by having more mastery on our ability to change our inner world.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing your story and your experiences on the mat. How can people reach you, schedule with you, join your online community?
Yes, I'd love to connect. You can learn more about my offerings at my website, yogawithveronique.com. You can learn more about my book, The Shine Collective, our upcoming retreats, as well as there's special surprises on there. Like I have mason jar recipes, like this overnight oats recipe that I've been perfecting over the years. That is a favorite for sure. And then, what I think is most important, probably so helpful in these times where, we could listen to all the podcasts and read all the books and take in the information. I really want to impress that this next phase of shifting from anything that feels inhibiting, and maybe if there's like any lingering piece of being intimidated, to wanting to shift that to be inspired. I really invite everyone listening to send me a message or share this with someone that you think, would find some kind of impact from it. And then I have a promo code for everyone listening to join into the Shine Collective to try it out for free for 30 days. And so you can just go to my website, click join Shine, and then enter promo code Shine 1111, and then you can get in and see if it resonates. I think more and more, the more we come together, the more grounded we feel, the more uplifted we feel, the more we remember that we're not doing any of this alone.
Definitely not. Oh, thank you so much, Veronique. And we'll have your information also in the description below, along with that promo code. Thank you to all the listeners and viewers. And if you enjoyed this content, please, give it that thumbs up and subscribe and all of the things that help those algorithms, both on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and all of those. Thank you. And till next time.
Thank you, Elizabeth.